Hey there, it's Renessa Boley Layne, and I want to welcome you to another conversation on creating your perfect work. We are in the middle of our Love and Work Summit. So if you have missed any part of this series, go back, catch up, figure out the content that totally resonates with you. Because whether you are married, single, dating, coupled up, craving love, or running as fast away from love as you possibly can, as I always say, there is something in this series for you. And so we're not just talking about transforming your love life, but we're really leveraging how your love life plays a huge role in your work, how you're succeeding in your career business, how you're showing up in your leadership. There really is a deep connection between the two. And this conversation really begins to punctuate some of that. And I love when I can finally put a name to stuff. Like, we sometimes have these experiences in our lives and we don't even have the vocabulary to describe it. And today's guest is going to help us do that, right? So we are always accustomed, we're kind of accustomed to the warm and fuzzies of relationship, kind of the things that we're feeling, whether it's good or bad. But in this conversation, we're going to give meaning to some of those feelings, but we're also going to explain and examine lasting relationships and how our brain plays such a major role in that. It's not just about the heart. There's so much about the brain that drives this. And we're going to talk about the importance of retraining our brain in order to be able to create and sustain the lasting love that we want. So this is hugely applicable whether you are single or dating or somewhere in between. There is something in this conversation for you. And the dapper man that is sharing the screen with me is none other than Dr. Gary Salyer. And for the last decade, Dr. Salyer has been in private practice, working with both singles and couples in heart-centered transformation so that they can rewire their rules for love in their brain and create a love that lasts. And so again, we're going to be talking about the brain, which is such a fascinating a piece of work. So Dr. Gary speaks to national audiences. He's a featured expert on various celebrity TV and radio shows. He's been on Hay House Radio, which many of you are familiar with. He's been on Coast to Coast AM, KCBS. He is the author of a groundbreaking book called Safe to Love Again: How to Release the Pain of Past Relationships and Create the Love That You Deserve. I've actually read the book. It's such a fascinating read. Highly recommend it. We're going to be talking about many of the concepts in that book as well. And for additional information, you can always find out more about Gary at Gary Salyer, SALYER.com. And we'll also have some free giveaways at the end of our interview, so you'll definitely be able to connect to his content. But what I really value about Gary's work is that he gives us a roadmap for how our brains are creating our experience in love, and also how to rewire your brain and retrain your brain to create the kind of love that you want. And again, it's really, really powerful and it's really different. So whether you're looking to find Mr. Right or you're looking to make a right relationship last in a way that feels good, this conversation is going to shift your perspective in really, really, really big ways. And Gary will make that compelling connection between how we show up in love and how we show up in the marketplace. So with that, I want to welcome you, Dr. Gary. Thank you for being on the show. Looking so forward to kind of pitching and catching with you.
Thank you, Renessa. It's an honor to be here. It really is.
Absolutely. Thank you. All right. So we're going to just kind of dive in because there's so much content that I want to cover. But you say in your book that, no, I'll go to a different question here. I think many people and some experts have this mindset that we shouldn't really need relationships. And I think for some of us women, if you've ever been burned or whatnot, you kind of swear off men, and men do the same thing. They swear off women, and you have this idea that you can just kind of go through life without necessarily needing that deep kind of intimate relationship. But you beg to differ on that point. Why is that?
Well, thank you. Yeah, it is. I mean, it's a natural place people go, especially in a culture that accents the individual. You always see Marlboro man, or I guess woman, but and the fact of the matter is with radical American individualism, as Robert Bella once called it, it wants to put everything on the I. So that seems to be our safe zone. That's where we fall back to. But science is now pretty clear that we are not a species that does well on our own. We were wired for connection. Our brains have experience expectancies, and that experience is connection. And we know now, you could look at polyvagal theory or anything in attachment, find out that there's no such thing as self-regulation. Yes, we can do it, but the fact of the matter is, it was probably learned in conjunction with another person. What we do best is when we co-regulate. So the whole idea that we fall back to ourselves and we don't need love, I, in my book, would call that a split right to separate and belong. All right to separate, no right to belong, be in a we, be supported.
Got it. So you also say that the choices that we make in love, whether we are single or married, they don't come out of the blue. Our experiences with love just don't happen. You say that all love experience is actually created by our brain and that there is no exception to that rule. In your book, you call it the neurological explanation of the law of attraction, which most people are familiar with law of attraction.
Yeah.
But before we go any further, I really want to establish the baseline foundation. I want to establish the baseline foundation for this idea that our brains create our experiences.
Okay. Let me tell you, let's answer it with the story that I tell on page 10 of the book with Paul, right?
Yeah.
This is a man that came to me, and he had been twice divorced. Both marriages petered out about 10 years into it, because he was always expecting, when does love turn against me? And both of his wives, after 10 years, said, if you don't get that I love you by now, if you're always expecting me, then fine. And he goes, well, of course, I told you you'd turn against me. When we started working with this, now this is how the brain creates experience. Experience is not the same thing as what happened. Experience is what goes on in between the 6 inches between your ears. It went back to an imprint, a time when he was 4. And that belief, when does love turn on me, came from when his father, according to him, turned on him and beat on him. Now, a very secure family that had 2 other siblings that were married 20 and 25 years, but he was the anxious one. And what he said was, my father never did anything like that before or after. And he's always saying, they were at a campfire, and when did love turn against me? And then his dad turned and beat on him, and he's looking out for it. He and his brother show up to one of my events, and his brother's the security, right? And he's sharing this story, and I'm on stage watching this guy's jaw drop, his brother, like in total disbelief, and finally interrupts him. He says, that this story is why you're so screwed up, although he used another word.
Yeah. We can imagine.
He did use another word. He says, man, you got it all wrong. I was there. I was 9 or 4. And get this, you got too close to the campfire and your pant legs caught on fire. Dad wasn't beating on you. Dad didn't turn against you. He was keeping you from becoming a roasted marshmallow. Now, there's what happened. And then there's the crapshoot of what a 4-year-old brain could make of experience when it's not that aware. That's why I say that, your brain is an experience creating machine. And the fact matter is it has to delete a whole lot of things to bring consciousness into play. And with all that deletion, generalization on deletion, think about it this way, and I'll finish this thought.
Yeah.
Part of your brain down here receives 50 to 60 million bits of information a second. The part that makes sense of it all, the part that says, hi, I'm Renessa, it does about 138. That's your prefrontal cortex. You have to delete that much just to be able to make up the story and believe. Now, that's the difference between reality and experience. It's only about 50 or 60 million bytes a second.
Yeah. That was a powerful story. I actually did read that story. And so much of how we show up in the world really does come down to the meaning that we give those experiences.
Mhm.
Or actually the meaning that, because there's the facts of what happened, right? So in this case, the fact was his dad did out of the blue jump all over him, start beating over him. Like that's objectable fact.
Yeah.
But the meaning that he gave to the experience then dictated how he showed up in so many other aspects of our lives. And so as women are listening in now, and as you're starting to just kind of begin to make sense of the things that we're sharing in this interview, you can begin to ask yourself, what meaning have I given to different experiences in my life? And how have they affected my perspective on love, my perspective on my desirability, my perspective on what's possible? And then in parallel, and we'll talk about this a little bit as we go on into the interview, how does that impact how I show up in the marketplace? Because there really are parallels to that. And sometimes it is not the reality of what happened. It is the experience or the meaning or the story or the narrative that I have given to that situation. And I've certainly been guilty of that in my own life. I'll go through, having really, conversations with my husband or whatnot, or there'll be a look that he'll give or something. And I have interpreted that look to mean a certain thing. And then I'm off to the races, either in response, not in response, in reaction to that, because I have already, given a certain, and vice versa, he'll do that to me as well. But the meaning that we give to things become really, really important. But the point that Dr. Gary's making here is that those experiences can then take on a life of their own. And then we begin to attract more of the same experience. And so as we go through, the other foundation that I want to set is this connection between our love life and our work life.
Mhm.
And when I decided to do this series, I started with this general belief. Like I just had this general belief. I believe that our love life and the quality of our intimate relationships just impact our career and our business in some way. And it just started as a general belief. And it was something that I just simply wanted to explore. But you, however, take a much more definitive position on that. Like you maintain that our love style, which we're going to talk about love styles in a bit, but you say that our love style tells our brain to create experiences across the board that impact anything from our career to our business to our health and all of that. Like you're really definitive about that position. Tell us more about that love and work connection.
Okay. So what I began noticing early on, I think the universe threw it at me, right? You got to realize that probably 35% of my clients over 15 years have been entrepreneurial women who own businesses. Okay. Right? You got to know there's this large chunk here. And what I began to notice early on was that the same pattern you'd see in their intimate relationships, you'd see an analogy over there in their business. For instance, one of the very, very, very first, she had a missing, I talk about rights in the books. These are permission slips that we were given to have our needs met or to not, to feel empowered to make choices or not, to be in a supportive we or to not, right? So I talk about these 6 rights. And when I noticed, this one woman came to me and she had a whopper of a missing right to have her needs met, which meant that she was always with men that were takers, or they were married men that could never give her what she wanted anyway, right? And when we worked on that, she dropped a married boyfriend, and lo and behold, she gets a boyfriend that can actually show up and wants to give to her. Then she shows up one day and she goes, I'm beginning to realize my roommate's a taker. You think there's any relationship between that and what's been going on in my intimate relationships? I said, yeah, same missing right. And then about 6 weeks later, she showed up. She goes, I'm always giving away. I'm always giving away freebie after freebie, and I'm resentful, and I can't ever seem to charge my value. Do you think there's anything to do with that? Bingo. Yahtzee. Feeling of unworthy, which gave her a feeling of I can't reach out for my needs. Told her to find takers, told her married men, told her to get roommates, and told her not to charge her value. Now, with other rights, one summer, about 5-6 years ago, I had 4 women who all had 7-figure businesses. So a right to have their needs met is not in play. right?
Yeah.
They're able to charge their value,
Yeah.
not a problem. But all of them, well, one was married and 3 were single, but they all had the same pattern. Their man didn't show up for them. If they had a boyfriend and they were moving, well, the one said, suddenly a week before I move, he goes on vacation by himself and comes back afterwards, says, anything else I can do?
It's all done.
All of them early on learned what I call a split right to separate and belong. They had way more right to be separate, but they had no permission to belong in a wonderful, supportive we. All me, do it by myself, but no right to be really and truly supportive. All of them had staffs that did not properly support them. They had their staffs, but as the one said, I don't believe what's going on. Just like my boyfriend, 5 people from my staff took on vacation in the middle of a launch. Do you think there's anything going on here? Bingo, Yahtzee. She picked people that wouldn't show up for her. Now, most people that don't have that right to be in a we, either they won't seek out the coaching, or they won't seek out the VAs and support, or if they do, they'll find people who will abandon them, who won't properly support them, they don't have the skills. All of them swapped out boyfriends. One, I worked with the husband as well, and we had to do more marriage stuff, and all of them swapped out their staffs. One, I even did a VIP day on how to pick a secure staff.
Mm-hmm.
That's not an accident. Different missing right, different pattern. And from there, I began to notice that each right showed up in very specific ways according to the entrepreneurial model. They can work in corporate as well. I've seen people that wouldn't seek a raise when it should be, right?
Yeah.
But if they don't have the right to exist, to really feel welcomed with joy into this world, they have a flight from their body and being in the now to their being in their head and their left side of their brain. They don't want to feel they're kind of floating above existence. And these people will suck client support. They'll always wonder why they're losing clients even after they sign them.
Mm-hmm.
Missing right to have their needs met, they don't feel worthy and nourished, then they don't charge their value, or they find takers, or they're always giving away freebies.
Mm-hmm.
Right to, if they have no right to separate and belong, they can't find the support. They either get lousy support or they won't get the coaching. There's another right that comes from a feeling of cherished and protected. They can't, so they can't find it. Now, if they didn't feel empowered with choice and they felt more disempowered, they won't have a right to create their own experience. Now, if they can't create their own experience, what I looked at, these people will well at trying to market. The market is about creating an experience, or they will not be able to properly choose the business model that works for them, because they'll be following somebody else's model and this person's model and that, and they will lose themselves in every other person's model, the newest guru to have a 3-day weekend, just like they lose themselves in relationships.
Interesting.
Or if another feeling, if they don't have a right to assert, they can't truly give voice and in any conflict situation, or they're afraid to be on stage. And then the last right I talk about is a right to love and be loved right back. And what I found out is they don't have a right to a raving fan club. I watched one client who I was working with privately, and I happened to be at an event where she was speaking. She did a TEDx worthy job, and she was getting a standing ovation, and man, she takes in all but maybe 2 nanoseconds, and she runs from the stage. She didn't have a right to receive love in her relationships, and she couldn't bring it in. So all of those, if you don't have a right to a raving fan club, how do you leverage your business? How do you grow it?
Mm-hmm.
Some part will sabotage. So that's how I began to realize by watching a third of my clients who are entrepreneurs, and it was like smoke follows fire.
Yeah. And so if you're listening into this conversation, we're going to go deeper into these rights, because you're probably like, what is he talking about? Where do these rights come from? We're going to set that up for you. But the foundation I wanted to lay is to be able to see the correlations between kind of how we might show up in our love relationship and how that might translate. And for some of you listening, you can see the parallels just from the examples that Dr. Gary mentioned, whether you're in an entrepreneur or you're in the career space, because they're really there. But we're going to take a deeper dive in a moment. But you do say, I want to pull up a moment. You say that there are basically 3 love styles.
Mhm.
Tell us what those are and kind of how they actually show up, and then we'll go a little bit deeper in
Okay.
a moment.
You've probably heard of, I call them love styles.
Okay.
They're in the literature, you'll see as attachment style.
Yeah.
That's because John Bowlby, who was the father of attachment theory, was afraid love didn't sound scientific enough, so he went with attachment. But
Yep.
what he thought was love, right?
Yes,
So
right.
the original what Bowlby wanted to say, right? These love styles, these are what an attachment style is how your brain originally got wired to love and be loved.
Okay.
So there is the secure. The secure are wired to give and receive love. Okay, and we know that if you think about it, there's a famous experiment called the strange situation where you separate a child from their mother, and based on the reunion, the way they react to the reunion, that style will track for the rest of their life, barring intervention. When mommy goes away, when the mom comes back, the secure, they calm down. They're easily consoled. They give a big hug. It's as if, yeah, I knew mom was going away, but I knew she was coming back. They're secure. And then they go out and play with their toys again. Now, there's also another one, what's called avoidant babies. And these avoidant babies, they just continue to play they were already playing with their toys over in the corner. Mom leaves, they look up and go, mom's leaving. It was like they expected to be left alone. Mm-hmm. And when you come back, they might have cried a little bit, but most of the time they're just playing with their toys. And they look precociously mature. But what they've already learned is they got to be on their own. Mm-hmm. We now know that avoidant babies walk on an average 2 months earlier than anxious and secure babies. That's how much, that's not consciousness. Mm-hmm. That's just neurological wiring saying, if I want that binky, I got to get my legs up and run.
Yeah.
Right? And they grow up to be what's called dismissive, emotionally dismissive. They're the ones that be on their own. They don't like commitment. They like their alone time. Mm-hmm. And there's the anxious. The anxious baby, when mom comes back in the room, they've got an ambivalent style. They want to win and they want to hit mom all at the same time. They're doing this thing and hitting, and they can't figure it out. They're the babies got connection, disconnection. Instead of having a flight response, they have a fight response. And they cannot be consoled. They are not going to go out there and play with those toys. No, you're not getting away from me again. And they grow up to be what's called preoccupied. Where were you last night? I just texted you 10 minutes ago.
You didn't text me back. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. You still love me? All that stuff. They're always looking for, when does love go away? And how do they hyper manage a relationship? So control, manipulation, managing, right? They're preoccupied with their past, so much so that they're just as bad as the dismissive. Whereas the dismissive, the avoidance will simply not pay attention to your feelings. They won't either, but they pay attention only to get their own, and then they can't really attune to you either, but just a different mechanism. So these 3 tend to go through life, barring intervention. Yeah. And the goal of my work is, if you really want to change someone's fate in love and business, give them a secure lifestyle. Yeah. I argue that love is the operating system. It's not a program, it's the operating system. It's not Word or Excel, it's Windows. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. OS, whatever.
And it's so interesting. So when you listen, we all would love to think that we are the secure style, especially if you're showing up in the marketplace with some level of success. You think, well, clearly I am, well adjusted and so on. But I would encourage, listen to some of the definitions and listen as we go into the conversation for one, I always believe that you start with yourself first, because whether you're hopping from relationship to relationship or whatever, wherever I go, there I am, right? So I'm always taking myself with me. And so listen then, from the lens of, okay, where do I see myself? Do I see myself anywhere in this anxious definition, or do I see myself anywhere in this avoidant definition? Because if I can understand myself first, then it becomes that much easier to spot that in someone else. And so then from the dating perspective, your selection process changes. And then in the married and or significant other, you're able to see more clearly what's happening. Because remember in the beginning, I was like, it's about being able to put a vocabulary to the experiences that you're having and to be able to understand them. And from that point, we can actually make a difference and create the kind of relationships that we want. But I'm curious for you, Dr. Gary, so can I have a secure love style, yet attract someone who has an avoidant or an anxious love style? Because we always think it's the other person, so what's wrong with somebody else? But if I've attracted that into my life, whether it's spouse or dating or whatever, does that reveal something about my actual love style, or kind of give me a feeling on that?
Yeah, I want to answer that. I just want to say one thing. When you talk about you think about me and wherever I go, there I am.
Mm-hmm.
The key is whether there's a me. Is it me that's wired to be in a we?
Interesting. Yeah.
Because it's the ability, secure at its core, is the ability to maintain, and keep a we in various relationships.
Yeah.
And this is core for a couple. Show me a couple without a we, and I'll show you a war or a horrible distance.
Yeah.
Now, can you attract someone? Well, if you're talking about initial attraction, oh yeah, I mean, it is, I tell clients all the time, certainly an anxious and avoidant person can knock on your door on a social media app, because you're good looking or whatever else. They don't, where these rights come in, these love styles, the secure will choose another secure partner about 85% of the time. They have real pickers when someone isn't going to be there for them or they're preoccupied. They typically choose another secure. Where it comes in is the anxious and the secure. The anxious and the avoidance don't have a full set of rights. They have missing rights, so they find someone else that will reflect back those missing rights, and that's going to be either anxious or avoidant. So the law from attraction is initially that a lot of anxious love styles had enmeshed relationships where there was no right to be a me or not enough, right? And so that first hit of distance they get seems like a fresh breath air, but it turns out to be their worst nightmare. So it's not so much initial attraction, but the deeper attraction that says, let's go for this. We will always, what I tell clients, you're always having the experience that you have been given the rights for, usually in childhood,
Interesting.
later on in adulthood.
Interesting.
And then the couples, once they've chosen someone, then what do you think they do? Then they gripe about it. Right?
This buster.
And what you have is dueling missing rights in most common. When people say, here we go again, it's because you only have the right for that experience. Getting past Groundhog Day, as I call it, you have to restore both those people's rights so they can choose each other again in a fuller way. And what I say in the book, it's a line I got from a woman that was married 55 years. I asked her on stage, what's your secret sauce? She goes, oh, it's easy. I take no BS. I give no BS. The secure give no BS. They take no BS. Because if you give it, someone's going to give it back to you.
Oh, yeah.
And if you take it, you're going to get resentful and give it to somebody.
Yeah.
And then love doesn't live in that place. Not for long.
Got it. So this is fascinating because I think for many of us, we go into relationships, again, relatively healthy people. We're not talking necessarily about the extreme outliers. And again, for many relationships, they start out, it's amazing, it's wonderful, it's great, your representative is showing up, all of that good stuff. And then when you really get down to the core of things, you're wondering, how did this happen? How did, And you made an interesting point around this is what you have the right to experience.
Mhm.
And so when it comes, if you know these things that Dr. Gary's teaching and you're aware of them, then your selection process is very different than if you go in completely unaware. Then you're making the best choice that you can, at the time, and the other person's probably well-intentioned as well, until you get in relationship and you realize, wow, these are the places that might be missing in me. These are the places that are missing in the other person. And now you're trying to figure out this dance together. But so now I want to kind of get into the nitty gritty, because you've been talking about rights and all of that.
Yeah,
And
we need to
so
talk about the four
the
feelings
four
too.
feelings, right? So that's where I'm going with that. So you tell me which one do you want to address? Do you want to address the four feelings first, and then let's back ourselves in, or what makes sense in terms of the order? Because both of them are really fascinating and both of them are necessary. So you tell me how you want to take it.
Rights and feelings are like both sides of a coin.
Okay.
But I have increasingly grown to put more emphasis on the feelings.
Okay.
Feelings are what are driving the boat. Feelings. And if you're a guy out there in business, I'm sorry to disappoint you. You have them too, but it's feelings. We can go back 10 months to 18 months is when that strange situation. By 10 to 18 months, about a year, a baby already has a love style. Now we know that the prefrontal cortex, which is logic and identity and story and limiting beliefs, will not come online until 3. So it can't be any of those running the ship. Can't be any of those telling that baby to be anxious, avoidant, or secure. The only thing up and running are feelings. And in those seminal feelings, if you were welcomed with joy, you're given a full right to exist in this world. So you can be in your body, you can feel your emotion, you can feel what's going on. That gives you a right to exist here, to be, and the world is your cozy oyster. And you don't have to go all the way to, floating around, escaping by being too spiritual, but never earthly, or all logical, but no emotions, which is where it usually gets split. If you were given the feeling of worthy and nourished, the little baby feels it's okay to reach out for my needs and to receive and take. This, if you were giving a feeling of cherished and protected, which is where you get to be me and separate and go out there and you notice that mom and dad are looking over you, so you get to be in a we too. Cherished, protected, and someone sees your essence, the essence of who you are, they can't get elsewhere, and they want to protect that right to be in a supportive we. That if you feel cherished and protected, you get a right to be a me and a we, or a right to separate and belong. If you felt empowered with choice, so that it was okay to create your own experience, you get that full right. You don't have to lose yourself in a relationship. Somebody does not have to be the standard of your experience. You also get, at the same time, a right to have your voice and choice. You get to choose what you want versus what you don't want. You don't have to sabotage. And so you get a right to assert. And then when about age 3, when this comes online, the brain sort of adds up the four feelings: am I welcomed, am I worthy, am I cherished, am I empowered? And then it pulls it together into what I call a right to love and be loved right back. And that's a real secure. And now for adults, it will also include us not only be loved emotionally, it will, after hormones turn on, there's a sexual element too, which we can only hope will not be there at 4, right? But the adult version is a little different than the child version, right? But not much, it's a full right. Those 6 rights come from 4 feelings. And think about it, 1 to 10. In any relationship you're in, 1 to 10, do you feel welcomed with joy? 1 to 10. Just think, if you're listening out here, do you feel worthy and nourished to have your needs met, to reach out? Do you feel cherished and protected, a me and a cozy we? Someone's got your back. Do you feel empowered with choice? I guarantee you, if you feel all 4 feelings, you feel pretty loved. And if you've got under 7 or 8 in any one of them, you're thinking we have a few issues. 2, you're thinking, I wonder what my best friend's therapist number is, or the best coach I can find. And if there's 3 or 4 missing, you're in a toxic relationship. It is feelings. This is not rocket science. A 1-year-old doesn't even know what a rocket is yet.
Yeah.
And if we're tracking these feelings, we must track them as couples. Am I giving them? Am I receiving them? And also in business. Also in business. I had a business coach that I was, when in their private mastermind, who read my book and realized, and he said, and it was great, he says, I just read this book. He told everybody else to read it as well. And he said, look, these 4 feelings, when you're structuring an event, if you haven't covered all of them, you're going to be missing people. If you're doing an offer and you haven't hit all 4 feelings, you're going to be missing people. If you're, and he said, and I realize why sometimes I don't always have the most productive staff meetings, because I am not doing a great job at empowering with choice. He said, so these things must also be, because people are always looking for love. Their attachment system is baseline, bottom. It's the operating system. There's never a time it's not working. And there's no love and business. It is all the time just working out a different. So you have to track them in business, in your offers, in your events. How am I doing it? If you're tracking that in your feeling, in your relationships, and all of what you're doing in a business, you're going to have a better business as well as better relationships.
Yeah. I love the simplicity of this because, again, there's all kinds of psychology behind it, and there's all of that, right? But the simplicity of it, I think everybody listening, if you're in a committed relationship, you can go down these 4 elements: welcome, worthy, cherished, empowered. And you can know right off the bat, how do I feel in this space, right? Which will then dictate and indicate the quality of the relationship as you are currently experiencing it. But to the other point, am I giving that? So if I'm getting flack on the other end from my spouse, not being happy, not being this, not being that, being pissed off, stonewalled, or whatever, they may not have the words to communicate, but you've got a GPS where you can then say, how am I doing? Does my spouse feel welcomed with joy? When they come home, how am I showing up in that space? Or do I not even look up from what I'm doing when they walk in the room? Do they feel worthy and nourished? All of those kinds of things. But what's also really interesting is that you're able to take a look and say, wow, do I as an individual feel worthy and nourished? So let's say I'm not in a relationship, but I've got some worth issues. Does that impact why I haven't asked for help in my career? Does that impact why I'm not looking for mentorship? Why I don't reach out for coaching? It's really because so Gary's got this from the love section on lock, and obviously from business, because you're coaching all kinds of people. I see women who come in all the time, whether it's because of discovery calls or whatever. And it's always so interesting, those who have a very difficult time investing in themselves. Like the idea of, I have this problem with my business, I'm miserable, I've got insomnia because I hate my job and blah, blah, blah. And then they get in front of a situation. It's the absolute best solution for them. It ticks all the boxes. This is exactly the program that I want. And when it comes to pulling the trigger to make the investment, it's more money for them. It's a bigger investment than, say, they have had for graduate or undergraduate school. And even for that, it was like a loan. Like they've never actually invested in themselves at that level. And so the challenge for them is actually justifying that I would actually spend this kind of money on me. Why? Because some of them culturally or whatnot have not ever had that experience. That's just not what you do. Right. Yes. And so you start to see some of those objections in your mind that are rooted and grounded in exactly what Gary's talking about here. I think it's really, really powerful.
Yeah, if you don't have those original feelings, his is the worst part of it. Whatever feelings you were given become your new reference, your new GPS for love. So we hope you have a GPS. The true one is welcomed, unworthy, and cherished, and empowered. Yeah. But if you were given unworthy, it becomes the new reference feeling that you judge all of your future life. You only have that right. If you felt disempowered, you only have the right to that feeling. Is and I mean, when I first started off, when I first thought about changing my life to do this new direction, and I thought, and I was going to do this training, I thought, oh, no, I can't afford that. That's $1,500. Oh my God. And the voice said to me, let me get this thing straight. How much? You gave your son $6,000 last summer so he could play professional baseball because, he's in the minor leagues and don't pay him as much to support him. And then the voice said, how come your son is more worthy of support than you? And I realized, yeah, that does make sense. If someone doesn't invest, most times it's a feeling of unworthy that's been their reference, and they keep choosing it because that's all that their brain knows how to be. It might be they have to feel unsupported, or it could be disempowered. In that descending order is what I found. And we have all been given an epidemic of unworthiness in this culture. I think there's so much unworthiness. I don't think you can just all track it back to just parents, although I think a lot of it's out there.
Absolutely.
I mean, any woman that reads any sort of magazine is getting a hit on what you have to be. We've got all these self-help things, and the self-help industry is being great, but it's always telling you there's another thing you need to fix in order to feel worthy. And that's the downside of the upside of the self-help. And you were born with a right to feel worthy. You had to be taught to feel unworthy. You were born to feel empowered. You had to be taught to feel disempowered. And then, of course, there's all, and if we're talking about the scope of history, I mean, African American people got that a lot, the disempowered stuff and unworthy. So there's history, there's culture, and I think the more we did our flight into science, left brain, I should say, versus right brain, the more we got away from our natural GPS, which is why our culture, the more scientific we got, the more split we got, the more individualistic we got. Because if these feelings are allowed to run the show, you're your natural birthright. And if you don't acknowledge them, they will come out sideways one way or another. Those old feelings of disempowered, and you have a right to reclaim feeling welcomed and worthy and cherished and empowered. Not only will your relationships go better, but your business will go better. I've even seen it work out with health. One woman that worked had a huge missing right to have her needs met. She always chose married guys. She told me that from the time she was 9, she was anemic, and no Western medicine, no amount of high-powered vitamins could fix her. When we gave her back a right to feel worthy, and she started dating differently, she came in a couple months later and says, I don't know what happened. She goes, I'm no longer anemic. Her body was imitating the energy in her brain. If I can't take in, I can't take in here. I mean, so it affects health too. Now, her body was just saying, oh, is that feeling unworthy? I better not take it in. Now, how does that work? I mean, you can read polyvagal theory, and you can get some medical, what's called medical unexplained symptoms, because attachment is through the vagus nerve is literally regulating every organ in your body. So whether your organs are working at efficiency or not efficiency has a lot to do with how secure and safe you feel in the world. And that has a lot to do with how much you're feeling welcomed, worthy, cherished, and empowered.
Wow. Yeah.
Here's one for you. Anytime we get contempt, which is the opposite of cherished, in a relationship, it turns off our T cells for 5 hours, both of us. For women, this makes them 9 times more at risk for breast cancer in the next 4 years.
Wow.
So it's not just business, it's health. This is why I've argued love is the operating system. So, when John Lennon said love, what was the question? Love is the answer. He wasn't too far wrong.
So here's my question for you, because you make a really interesting point. How then, because obviously as individuals, you can only control you. You can control what you give out, and you can also control what you absorb, right? I can't control how you engage with me, right? Now, obviously, if I'm in a dating relationship, I get to control whether we continue dating or we don't continue dating. So you have that, right? If you're in a committed relationship, you and your partner might be at different levels of growth, right? You might be at different levels of understanding. And so if you're in that relationship and a partner is throwing something your way, it could be contempt, it could be whatever because of their own, journey in this process. How then, as a woman that's listening in, how then do you not absorb that? How do you maintain your right to exist, your right, all these rights that you're talking about? How do you maintain? Because I can feel welcome with joy, cherished and protected, and all of that, even if you don't welcome me with joy, or even if you don't cherish and protect, I think. But help me understand that dance, right? Because it's one thing if two people are on the same page, but oftentimes they're not on the same page at the same time until they figure out, how to grow together. What do you do in those in-between times?
Well, if couples, it gets exponentially more complicated. Okay. Yep. The real question that to ask yourself, notice with a witness in mind, gosh, I'm having this experience. Mm-hmm. Isn't it interesting that I'm having this experience and not some other? Here's the $1 question. I wonder how my brain is creating this. Now, that doesn't mean if you have a contemptuous spouse who's always being one up and arrogant, right? Mm-hmm. A good narcissist will do that for you, right? Yep. It's just somebody having a triggered day, and they did, yep. And they have a background where that's a mother or father did that, right? That doesn't mean you're saying, well, I wonder how I created and taking responsibility. Yeah. But couples, see, when you have these missing rights, some part chooses the experience because it's familiar and safe. That's all you have the rights for. This is where, and if somebody isn't now, but you can also prod to get it. And you can also, and if someone won't give it to you and they're, then you can project it. In couples, this gets to be a little, you have to look as, was I really being, if you were, there's two ways. You could have picked someone who really was contemptuous, because that's your mother or father was always contemptuous. But if that happens, your brain is so filtered for ways I'm going to be contempted, if that's a word, right? That you can delete all the times that they showed up secure, or you'll reinterpret it as more than what it is.
Got it.
Now, the trick for me is to figure out is that sometimes they will project anxiety, and that person is trying to show up secure. And other times that person is avoidant, dismissive, and doesn't want to show up secure at all, and they're not at all. It's both. Mm-hmm. So with couples, the winning thing is for both parts of the couples to ask that question. Have a check-in every week on a scale of 1 to 10. How did I do this week as your partner? Yeah. And if anything under 9, you say, so what feeling was lacking? And then how did I give it to you? If couples learn, and then you listen, you have the humility to listen, right? Mm-hmm. Or to track it yourself. Once when I was dating with my beloved, I forgot I wasn't in college, and I was playing the stereo in my office a little too loud, and knock, knock. I can't hear it, knock, knock. And then like, oh my God. And she's waiting out there 3-4 minutes. And as soon as I opened the door, I said, I'll bet you don't feel very welcomed with joy, do you? And of course, and I said, exactly. I am sorry. Track it. Rat yourself out first. If you're always looking, what we're looking for is to track life and love with these 4 feelings. And and a lot of people, especially singles, they get long list of what they want, but they don't realize that partner's going to want them back. Track, am I giving those feelings? And can I really give them? And am I receiving them? And if imagine if we all did this, we'd have a way better world.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. I love this. We could go on forever, but in the interest of time, I want to rein it in. But I want to punctuate, and I'm glad that we focused on the feelings first. If you're listening in, I highly recommend getting the book. It's just it's really fascinating, and it's good. And it does a really good job of going deeper into the various rights, really talking about your right to exist, the right to have your needs met, the right to separate and belong, the right to create your own experience, the right to assert, the right to love and be loved. And when you're able to think about that and see, how do I really feel about these rights? Like, how do they present in my life? I think it's just a great way of self-exploration, and even exploring your own partner, or the people that you're looking to date, whatever. But these four feelings, honestly, it's such an easy assessment tool to be able to say, what's going, like, what's the condition, what's the temperature going on in our relationship here, and how am I showing up in love for the person that I say that I love. Plus, to your point about business and career, if you're a leader, if you're managing a team, this is a great, just instantaneous checklist on, am I meeting the needs of the people that I've been called to shepherd? Like, it's nothing to welcome people with joy into the office, or welcome people with joy into whatever virtual space that you have. And oftentimes we can get our egos in the way, or we can have all these kind of hierarchies, and not recognizing that if you've got a great baseline of love, your people are going to be loyal, they're going to stick around, they're going to be engaged, they're going to think twice about looking for another opportunity. Like, the parallels here are so simple. And so
Can I
I
give you an
really
example?
appreciate the conversation for that reason. Yeah.
Think about Zoom. Think about Zoom. We have more empowered with choice. But when people, have you ever been on a call that you've led or you've been on, and 80% of the people have got their showed up? You would never do this at a lot. How much welcome with joy is this?
Yeah.
There's that avoidant thing. And the thing is, I don't think all 80% are avoidant. That would run against all the statistics. I think the technology is inviting us more and more to be unworthy. Look at Facebook. How many times have you gotten weird comments you would never get face to face? Because anonymity gives you that. Technology is also affecting our attachment styles, and I'm now beginning to realize no less than. But if we're tracking this, well, of course, I invite people in my events. Turn this thing on. Don't do this. And that's not cool. So we are tracking it, and if we're in a business, it's because this is about love as well. Every point you're asking yourself, how am I giving these feelings?
Yeah.
And you have to receive them.
Yeah.
It's I haven't, if for some coaching, if somebody is really being rude time and time and time again to you, and all sorts of things, you have a right to create your own experience. You don't have to take that. Yeah.
It's understanding it as a right. It's understanding, this is what I'm entitled to feel.
Yeah.
And when you've been conditioned to feel something else, when you've been conditioned to feel unwelcome, or you've been conditioned to feel unworthy, then that becomes the new baseline. And therein lies the problem. And so I really wanted to get into how to retrain and how to rewire that, but time hasn't permitted. And so what I hope this has done for folks that are listening in, maybe that's a secondary conversation, I don't know. But what I hope it's done for people that are listening in, that it's actually just scratched the surface, and hopefully it's agitated you to some degree based on its simplicity. It's like, for real? This is what this work with? And you have now a vocabulary to kind of reference, both in your love relationships, but also in your relationships in the marketplace. And if so, this is a great opportunity to follow Gary and his work. And we're going to talk about a free gift that he's going to offer the audience. And so take advantage of that. Click on the link, enter your name and email address, and make sure that you take advantage and follow his work and invest in his work. Because again, when women are coming into me and they're at that place where they're looking to create their perfect work, they're bored, they're burned out, they're unfulfilled. So many of the things that we are addressing in the find the work thing whether it's career business, a lot of them are rooted in this. A lot of women don't make pivots. They've been 20 years in the marketplace. They've gone a certain direction because mama said, daddy said, or they were just floating down the river and ended up being senior director at X, hate the job, but have never, ever, ever, ever been the person to say, I'm going to intentionally design my next move. It's empowered with choice. And so now there is a nomenclature around some of that, but you're going to see the parallels. And so with that, I want to let people know what your free gift is. And again, as he explains that, click on that link, enter your name and email, and make sure that you follow and stay connected to this work and invest in this work. It is really, really powerful. So what you got?
I have a free gift called Dr. Gary's Guide for Lasting Love, because I think everybody has a right to have a lasting love, right? So if you go to the link, GarySalyer.com/, I think it's called Love Guide, I give you a right to create your own experience. There's 3 versions of it. One for people who are afraid to date and aren't dating, but they want to get back in the game. How do you move from there to a lasting love? Then there's the ones who are dating, but they're on the hamster wheel of Mr. or Ms. Wrong on that Groundhog Day. How do you find the one from that place? And then there's one for couples who are wondering, how do we get back to the love we signed up for? 3 different tracks for 3 different types of experiences, and you can choose the one. And it's all about going from where you're at to finding and keeping a lasting love, because what good is it to find if you can't keep?
That's right. Awesome. Well, I so appreciate you. I appreciate your time. I appreciate your expertise. I appreciate your generosity of spirit. And so with that, Dr. Gary, myself, thank you guys for your time. We'll see you on the other side. Bye.
Bye.